Hi there, Aaron Walter here. If you're hearing this, you're not currently on our premium subscriber feed. Design Better premium subscribers enjoy weekly episodes, 4 episodes per month in total, rather than 2, all ad-free and invitations to our monthly AMAs with the smartest folks in design and tech. You'll hear a preview of this episode, but if you'd like to hear the full conversation, please consider becoming a premium subscriber at designbetterpodcast.com/subscribe. It's just $7 a month, and it supports not only your personal growth, it also makes our work at Design Better possible. The podcast is available to everyone through our scholarship program. If you can't afford a subscription, email us at subscriptions@thecuriositydepartment.com, and we'll help you out.
As I think about designing with intention in my work and my personal life, it's my point of view that staying focused on those intentions really means having the stamina and great fundamental design habits to really rinse and repeat the things that you know work. And so that's really how I'm approaching my work as a design leader at DropBox, and also just as a human being in the world.
Alastair Simpson is accustomed to adaptation. The first half of his life was spent in the pursuit of a professional football career, or soccer as we call it here in the States. But things didn't go as expected, and he found himself searching for a new path in life. Football taught him discipline and to focus on excellence, traits that transferred very well into a career in design. He's led design teams at Atlassian, and today he's VP of Design at DropBox.
We spoke with Alastair about how he applies design principles to parenting, the role craft plays in making great products, and how to create a work environment that supports the creative process. This is Design Better, where we explore creativity at the intersection of design and technology. I'm Eli Woolery.
And I'm Aaron Walter. You can get ad-free episodes, discounts on our workshops, access to documentaries like Design Disruptors, and our growing library of books, as well as our monthly AMAs with big names in design and tech by becoming a Design Better premium subscriber. It's also the best way to support the show. Visit designbetterpodcast.com/subscribe to learn more. We'll return to the conversation after this quick break. And now, back to the show. Alastair Simpson, welcome to Design Better.
Thank you so much for having me, Eli and Aaron. It's a pleasure to be here.
Alastair, we've known you for a long time now. I think we first crossed paths at a fun design leadership event back in the day, and we've just kept in touch. And these days, you're leading design, VP of Design at DropBox, and your team's doing a lot of interesting stuff, and we want to explore that and the intentionality of how you're running that team. But maybe we could start with your origin story. Every good hero has an origin story, and you have an interesting one.
Yeah, I mean, I never wanted to be a designer, Aaron. That's the truth. I wanted to be a professional football player or soccer player for everyone in America who's listening in. I did play professional until 16, but didn't make the cut at 16. Didn't quite make it.
What was that moment like for you?
Honestly, I was devastated, like genuinely, because it's something that I'd been working towards since I was 5. And then in England at 16, you get your first professional contract, right? You basically get a 2-year deal between 16 and 18 before you can sign your first adult contract in kind of 17, 18. And yeah, I didn't make it. I was at a club called AFC Bournemouth in England that many will know are now in the Premier League. And it was a really hard moment because something that I'd worked really hard for over a decade didn't come to reality. And you know, we will actually talk about this as we talk about intentions, because that working hard was training every day, the same things over and over every day. And this is something that has bled into my kind of design career where, you know, people often ask me, what was it like to train and play at a professional football club? And honestly, the answer is really quite boring, because you're doing the same drill over and over again. Because if you can learn how to pass a ball 5 yards consistently, then when you're in the pressure moment of a game, you don't need to think about that. You can actually like focus your mind elsewhere and have enough awareness to like, you know, pick a great pass or like do something wonderful for your teammate. You're not thinking about the core foundational skill of just passing the ball. Yeah, but it was a devastating moment at 16. I went on to play semi-professional until I was 37. So I did keep up with kind of elite level sport. And, semi-professional is I was training 2 or 3 times a week with a big game on the weekend and getting paid a little bit of money for that. But I had a day job as well. But it was still a kind of elite level training, like 2 or 3 times a week, and then a big game on the weekend. And again, that taught me a lot about what it takes to succeed in large companies and in high pressure situations.
Just as a quick aside, did you watch Ted Lasso? And if so, what were your thoughts?
So, fun fact, I actually don't own a TV. That's a genuine thing. I do not watch much TV. However, I did watch Ted Lasso and it was genius. I was watching it with my wife, and she had never really she's American. She'd never really known about soccer or football. And I was just chuckling to some of the small in-jokes. She was like, "Why are you laughing?" I'm like, that is like such a cliche, like football thing from back in the day. I can totally relate to like the locker room antics and things that were going on. And it was great. It was like a wonderful story. And also interestingly, because hopefully we'll get to this, it's like Ted's son lives overseas from him, right? And as we'll probably talk about, like my kids actually live overseas from me right now. So there was some interesting parallels with Ted Lasso and some aspects of my life.
So given that, just since we're in the era of your childhood, where'd you grow up? Because I think maybe we even covered this the last time we talked to you, but for some reason, I think Aaron and I thought you grew up in Australia, but you grew up in the UK.
Yeah. That's right. I don't know. I'd say 50% of people pick my accent and 50% of people don't. They're just super confused. That's totally fine. So I grew up in England. I grew up on the south coast of England in a tiny village called Sway in the middle of a large area called the New Forest. And it was literally like the village was a few hundred people back when I grew up. And you went outside of the village and there were cattle grids to stop the wild roaming horses come into the village. And there were just wild roaming horses on the single track roads that we used to drive around. So I grew up there. I moved to London when I was 18 to go to college, and then promptly left when I was 22 post-college, and I traveled around the world for 2 years, South America, Central America, New Zealand, Australia, Southeast Asia, and then went back and lived in Australia for a year. And I did then have to leave after a year because my visa ran out and went back to England, but then essentially found a way to get back to Australia because it was a way of life that I really enjoyed. And then spent 12 years in Australia, and that was where my kids were born. I'm a citizen of Australia now, and then moved to California 7 years ago now. It's kind of wild to think that 7, 8 years have gone by. But yeah, so English, Australian, now Californian, and yeah, lots of travel still to England.
So tell us how you made that transition from, soccer enthusiast to design. Like, what's the transition there?
The transition really going to college, candidly, I was a little bit lost about what to do because when you have a big disturbance like that, it can take a while to figure out, okay, well, what's the new path? I think everybody in their life has experienced at least one of these moments in their life. And as I've already said, I was working towards being a football player for 10, 11 years. And then that dream kind of died. And so I was probably a little bit lost. I went to college. Didn't study pure design. I did a lot of consumer behavior and psychology, so why people do things in general. And then, as I said, when I left college, I actually went traveling for 2 years. I essentially traveled around the world for 2 years.
Was that part of a search, like for what is it that I want to do?
Exactly right. Like it was part of a search. And because I'd actually got turned down for some graduate jobs in design and in different fields in London when I finished college. And my best friend, Adam, who I actually saw a couple of nights ago, my best friend, Adam, said, "Hey, I'm going to go traveling to South America. Do you want to come?" And usually I would say no to something like that. I've never really left England. Why don't I just say yes? And so 6 months later, I was on a plane to Rio de Janeiro in Brazil. And that was the start of, as you said, like a search, really, like seeing what else was out there. And honestly, those 2 years were pivotal years for me because you get dropped into Brazil, Argentina, Bolivia, Colombia, all these countries where you don't speak the language, where there's a great community, there's great culture, and you have to learn to adapt and you have to learn to integrate really thoughtfully into people's ways of life. And I really loved that kind of year or two experience that I had. And I learned so much from it, and I broadened my exposure and what I was surrounded by, and something that I know you and I have talked a little bit about around craft and taste. It's like, what are you surrounding yourself with really elevates your taste. And I was really able to broaden my exposure to things on that trip. And that's something that stuck with me. And then I eventually landed in a job in Australia where I was a design team of one. I was not working in a particularly kind of hot industry. I was working at a company called Reed Business Information, which some people may know. At the time, it was the largest B2B publisher in the world at the time. But they did magazines in areas like manufacturing, agriculture, architecture. So quite niche, but they were worth a lot of money. But it was at a time when print publishing was really tanking, like going down. And a lot of the work that I was doing with the company I was at was transitioning that print revenue online and actually designing experiences online. There were directories at the time to actually generate, leads for customers and deliver news via the internet, which was newish at the time. That was where I honed my craft. As I said, I was a design team of one. I made so many mistakes. I was doing visual design, interaction design, research. I built my own usability testing lab using the Moray software. If you remember Moray, like at the time it felt offensively expensive. It was like $2,000 or $3,000. And I commandeered a room and like built a lab, and people were like, "What are you doing?" I'm like, "I'm building a lab. You'll be able to watch people use our products. It'll be really interesting." So yeah, just did that and made loads of mistakes. But what was super fascinating about that was that I was one of 10 people in this online division inside of Reed. 10 people was tiny, obviously. It was like, but looking back, it was really like a startup. It was just a total startup. And then we grew from 10 to 200 people in like 2 years. We went from zero revenue to double-digit million in revenue in like a few years. And so it was this crazy scaling journey in like the mid-2000s. And again, I didn't really realize it at the time, but I learned so much in how do you do rapid usability testing, rapid prototyping. I was fortunate that the engineers there had actually built their own A/B testing platform, and we could go from something that I had tested in my made-up lab as a prototype to coding it, to taking it live, and actually getting these statistically significant results in about a week because we had such scale. And that now more popularized as lean UX, right? And so that was like a really great learning experience for me, and just an introduction to the world of design and how to build products, and making loads of mistakes. I look back at some of the mistakes I made, and it's probably not some of my proudest moments.
So folks from our era at least might remember the company that you worked for at the time was called LexisNexis, right?
Yeah, correct. That was the big Reed business was a very big part of LexisNexis. That's right.
And so I remember going to the library, this is mid 90s, and the internet was just sort of nascent. So you weren't doing a lot of searches on the internet, but there was a LexisNexis database that you could access if you wanted to access articles from like, name your niche publication. So you could go in and search those.
That's exactly right. And some of those niche publications in LexisNexis would have been from Reed Business if they were in those particular verticals. And then they were part of like these databases, magazines, whatever, that we were then transitioning to fully fledged websites in, a manufacturing vertical, and delivering news and content, but also delivering the ability for companies to advertise online in the particular vertical. So it was a very interesting time. But yeah, it's fascinating that you remember the LexisNexis databases. That's a time ago.
Yeah, it was one thing that stood out. And then this was from another conversation with Irene Au, actually our very first podcast. But I still remember logging into Pine, the kind of Unix terminal, to access email. And she had this story about how, like, I think it was Larry Page, was like, she asked him what the ideal user experience was. And he was like, Pine. Like, what? Are you kidding me? Yeah, Unix terminal. That's the best way to access your email.
Yeah.
So things have changed over the years.
Oh my gosh.
Things have changed. Well, some not, but
you spent a large amount of time of your career at Atlassian and scaled that team. Maybe you could talk us through a few of the lessons you learned through that experience.
Yeah, Atlassian it's a set context. I was there for 6 years. I loved my time there. Genuinely had such a great time. I joined, I think there was about 900 people in the company who were in Australia at the time. And I was designer number 20, roughly. There was about 20 designers in the team of a company of about 900, 1,000 people. And I spent 6 years there, and when I left, the company was about 6,000 people. The design org was roughly 250, 300 people. I worked for the entire time for the chief design officer, the chief experience officer. I worked for him for the entire time. And I worked on every single product that Atlassian had at some point, because we were double-digit growth every year. My job changed pretty much every year because the company was growing and scaling so much. So I ran design for Jira, for Confluence, for Trello, for Bitbucket, for SourceTree. I also helped found what was called the Atlassian platform, which was a lot of common user experience components and infrastructure that a lot of the Atlassian products kind of consume. I look back on that experience with great fondness because I learned so much. Like, I learned what it was like to launch new products, how hard that is, because I also was part of the leadership team, which really sadly had to sunset HipChat. For those that remember HipChat, it was a product that came before Slack had existed. So I learned a lot about, okay, like, we had a great product that we'd acquired, but then we didn't scale it fast enough and find enough product market fit. And then Slack came out, and that was, the trajectory of Slack was just crazy. And so I learned a lot about hard lessons in focus, being really intentional. Again, we'll talk about, and, just what it takes to actually design a great product that can be enough, but sometimes it's not, right? Like, when you've got really hot competition, that's a very difficult nut to crack. And so doubling the team size every year. I remember when I was joined, it was like 20, and then within less than a year, it had gone to 40 in design, and then it was like 80, and then it was like 160. And it was just a crazy time because you would put in a process, you would put in your design critique practices or whatever it may be in your team. And then literally 3 to 6 months later, it was like, oh, it's broken. It doesn't work anymore because the team's not 9, it's now 25, and we're dealing with 3 locations, not 1. Like, this doesn't really work. You've got some people in an office, some people on VC. It's hard for people to give feedback. So learning how to scale different practices and processes was one of the key lessons. And we made a lot of mistakes, honestly. Like, I look back on that time where we tried to do specific things, which honestly, some of them didn't necessarily work, but I think that's how you learn, and then how you iterate, and then how you make things better for the next time. And so, as I said, I look back on that experience with great fondness, and I learned a lot, and I'm still good friends with many of the people there and that are still there, and some who've left and moved on.
There's a bit of a trap when you're in that situation of scaling, is you have to take action so quickly. And taking action, if you don't, you get scenarios like, hey, HipChat didn't quite take purchase as we had hoped. Or you can get a scenario like, we took a lot of action and all of a sudden that wasn't the right decision. And you alluded to how intentionality is an important part of what you're focused on right now with your team at DropBox and the conversation that you're having with your colleagues there. Walk us through that. What does that look like in a product organization to be more intentional about the way that you work and how you collaborate?
I will answer that. I want to touch on something you just said though, Aaron, because it's a lesson that I learned. Because in my time there at Atlassian, I think I have a strength and a weakness. That is, I have a bias to action. Like, that's just who I am, right? I have a bias to action. And I think though at times at Atlassian, and even some of my times at Dropbox, I was biased to action and just moving, and okay, we've got a problem, fix it. We know what the fix is, let's move, right? And there's a concept in meditation, I'm doing a lot of meditation practice at the moment, around you get stuck in attention. And attention is like, to make it simple, is like, okay, there's 10 things I've got to do. I'm just going to do them, and I'm going to do them really fast. Whereas there's also this concept of awareness where you can step out of attention. And yes, there are 10 things to do, but how do you recognize what the most important thing is to do, and actually what the bigger picture is that you're trying to solve for? And I think that's very important, because something that I learned from that time is, when I look back and reflect, which I do pretty much every year, is like, I probably got stuck too much in attention and too much in this action-oriented bias that I have, and wasn't thoughtful enough in like, okay, how do we actually scale the team, the part of the team that I run? How do I actually scale that team more thoughtfully? And that then comes to something that you just talked about this notion of intentionality. And the last kind of 5 or 6 years of my life, so kind of the latter part of my Atlassian career, and then I've been at Dropbox just over 4 years, I've really been leaning into this notion of being hyper intentional with everything that I choose to do and spend my time on. And now, if you think about that though, and if people are really thoughtful, I like to think about polarities. And people who are thoughtful might think, well, Alastair, nobody starts out trying to be unintentional. Like, nobody is like just thoughtlessly trying to do things with anything that they do in life or work. But the reality is that life happens, and we lose focus on our intentions. Or, as I just talked about, we get stuck in this kind of attention and like, I've got 10 things to do and I need to do them faster and quicker. And there's just so much going on. And so again, like something we can all relate to, a common scenario, it's December 31st. The ball is dropping. The seconds tick down. You're filled with hope and excitement, the best intentions for the year ahead. And you make a promise to yourself or maybe your team, a New Year's resolution that this year will be different. And you're determined to take that on. So everybody can picture that, I'm sure. But as we all know, the reality looks really different. And studies show that 88% of people who set New Year's resolutions fail them within the first 2 weeks. 2 weeks. And Strava, the fitness app, which I use, they found that by January 12th, which is under 2 weeks, most people's fitness kick has started to wane. And so it's right. It's
That's
like
brutal.
Yeah, it's brutal. But it's true. But I don't think anybody sets out with bad intentions or trying to be unintentional or thoughtless. It's just life happens. We get busy. We get caught up. We don't have enough awareness to kind of step out and look at a bigger picture. And so how that, you asked about how that relates to my role as a design leader. I'm sure every designer and design leader listening to this, we all start out with the best intentions. It's like a New Year's resolution. Everybody wants to start, or they have the intention to craft experiences with excellence, to simplify and make really thoughtful like user experiences, to be really customer centric, to talk to customers every day, every week, or to deliver only the best user experiences. But as we all know, somewhere along the way, things can start to slip. And again, these scenarios are probably common. We end up not speaking to customers every week. Like it just kind of slips. Design critiques shift from critique, giving feedback, to just seeking consensus. And again, design critique, maybe it doesn't happen. Oh, we'll cancel it this week. Okay, we're not doing it this week. So it's not a ritual anymore because we're busy. This other thing takes priority. Or hiring and onboarding, which are the most important things you can do as a leader, like getting the right people in and then making sure their first 90 days they're set up for success. That often takes a back seat to all the things that you're cramming into your workday, right? And so why do they unravel? And as I think about designing with intention in my work and my personal life, it's my point of view that staying focused on those intentions really means having the stamina and great fundamental design habits to really rinse and repeat the things that you know work. And then also when things go wrong or they get off track, which they will, stuff will happen, things will go wrong, to have the fortitude to just refocus on the fundamentals of our craft and not be distracted by some new or novel idea or by something that is grabbing our attention, but is not really that important, right? I like this quote by James Clear. I read a lot of his work. Atomic Habits is just a great book. He says, you don't need more intensity, you need more consistency. Intensity impresses, consistency transforms. And intensity is like running a marathon. You do it once and then you give up your fitness kick. Or intensity could just be working harder. Okay, instead of being able to do 5 things, we're going to do 10 things today. But that's not sustainable, right? When what you really need to do is just be consistent on the fundamentals and do fewer things better. And coming back to, where we started the conversation around my early life as a football player, that was really what we were doing. It was just the fundamentals, passing a ball, heading a ball. Like we weren't doing any real magic in training. It was just the fundamentals of our craft. And so that's really how I'm approaching my work as a design leader at DropBox and also just as a human being in the world.
I think that's great, especially in our world, the software world, where attention is often divided and everything is, speed is like the number one thing that we optimize for. But I want to poke on this a little bit because there's discipline, which is another way to describe what you're talking about. There's intentionality of these are the things I want to do and the discipline to carry that through. But when you're in an executive leadership position at a company, your time is constantly sliced, diced, and julienned by everybody else, which makes it really hard to have attention and to have energy for the most salient, necessary things. How do you deal with that?
Discipline. One word. No, and also it's a great question and a great poke, Aaron. And the first thing I think you need to do, and I feel very fortunate at DropBox where I sit on our executive leadership team called S Team. I report directly to Drew Houston, who's our co-founder and CEO. So I feel very fortunate in that respect, right? But the first thing you then need to do is align on.
If you'd like to continue listening to this conversation, you'll need to subscribe at designbetterpodcast.com/subscribe. Once you do, you'll get access to every full-length episode, all ad-free, monthly AMAs with inspiring people in design and tech, and recordings of all our past AMAs. The podcast is available to everyone through our scholarship program. If you can't afford a subscription, just email us at subscriptions@thecuriositydepartment.com and we'll help you out. Your support makes design better possible. Invest in yourself and the design community by subscribing at designbetterpodcast.com.